Sarah Martinez sat in seat 14C of Delta Flight 447, her laptop open, her face blank. She looked like every other business traveler on the Tuesday morning flight from Chicago to Miami. Gray blazer. White shirt. Reading glasses perched on her nose. A half-empty coffee cup in the holder beside her. Nobody looked at her twice. That was exactly how she wanted it. For 7 years, Sarah had perfected the art of being invisible. Not literally invisible, of course. But the kind of invisible that makes people's eyes slide past you without registering. The kind where flight attendants forget they already asked if you want peanuts or pretzels. The kind where your coworkers can't quite remember your name even though you've worked together for 3 years. Sarah Martinez. Administrative assistant at an insurance company in Denver. Single. No pets. Rented a studio apartment in a building where neighbors never made eye contact. Ordered the same sandwich from the same cafe every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Lived a life so perfectly ordinary that it left no impression on anyone. She had a routine for everything. Wake up at 6:30 a.m. Coffee, black, no sugar. Shower exactly 8 minutes. Dress in clothes from discount department stores, nothing memorable, nothing expensive, nothing that suggested taste or personality. Drive to work in a 10-year-old Honda Civic that blended into every parking lot. Sit at her desk from 9 to 5, processing insurance claims with mechanical efficiency. Go home. Microwave dinner. Watch television without really watching. Sleep, or try to. Her co-workers knew nothing about her. Janet from accounting had invited her to happy hour once. Sarah had declined politely, citing a headache. Janet never asked again. Mark from the IT department had tried making small talk by the coffee machine. Sarah had responded with one-word answers until he got uncomfortable and left. After a few months, people stopped trying. That was the goal. Be so unremarkable that nobody wanted to know more. 7 years ago, there was no Sarah Martinez. 7 years ago, there was only Captain Rebecca "Ghost" Thompson. Sarah stared at her laptop screen without seeing the spreadsheet open in front of her. Her hands, resting on the keyboard, were steady. They were always steady now. It had taken 3 years of practice to stop them from shaking during takeoffs. 2 more years before she could book a flight without her heart racing. 7 years, and she still had to force herself to breathe normally when she heard the engines change pitch. Every flight was a test. Every takeoff brought memories she'd spent years trying to bury. The sensation of acceleration, of leaving the ground, of climbing through clouds, it all connected directly to nerves she'd tried to sever. Like phantom limb pain, except the limb was her entire identity. The businessman in 14B glanced at her. Nervous flyer? Sarah manufactured a small smile. The one she'd practiced in mirrors until it looked natural. A little. You. I fly every week. You get used to it. She nodded politely and returned her attention to her laptop. The conversation died naturally, exactly as she'd designed it to. Perfect. He wouldn't remember her face by the time they landed. She'd be just another anxious passenger in a sea of forgettable people. But Sarah would never get used to flying. Not after what she'd done. Not after what she'd survived. Not after who she'd been. The memories came anyway, like they always did at 35,000 feet. At this altitude, the barrier between Sarah Martinez and Captain Rebecca Thompson became paper-thin. Up here, where the air was cold and the engines hummed with power, where every sensation connected to flight and speed and danger, she couldn't hide from herself quite as well. She closed her eyes and tried to focus on her breathing. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The therapist she'd seen for exactly 3 sessions before quitting had taught her that. Except the therapist didn't know why Sarah needed the breathing exercises. Didn't know what Sarah was running from. Didn't know that the woman sitting in her office, claiming mild work stress, was actually a combat pilot with a classified service record and enough psychological trauma to fill a textbook. Sarah had stopped going to therapy because talking about her anxiety meant risking questions about its source. And questions about its source meant lying or revealing herself. She chose isolation instead. It was safer that way. Captain Rebecca Thompson hadn't been invisible. She'd been legendary. Call sign, Ghost. Not because she was quiet. Not because she disappeared. But because when she flew, she moved through enemy airspace like she didn't exist. No radar signature. No warning. Just sudden, devastating precision that left enemies confused and terrified. Rebecca had flown the F-22 Raptor. The most advanced fighter jet in the world. 2 engines capable of generating 35,000 pounds of thrust each. Stealth technology that made her invisible to enemy radar. Weapon systems so precise she could hit a target the size of a car from 5 miles away. Speed that could break the sound barrier. Maneuverability that defied physics. The F-22 cost $150 million per aircraft. The Air Force had fewer than 200 of them. And Rebecca had been trusted to fly one into the most dangerous situations imaginable. She'd been the youngest female pilot in her squadron at Langley Air Force Base. The first woman to lead certain classified missions that even now, years later, she couldn't discuss. The pilot other pilots talked about in whispers in the ready room, their voices carrying equal parts respect and disbelief. Ghost can fly through anything. Ghost doesn't miss. Ghost saved my life over Syria. I watched Ghost thread an F-22 through a canyon at 600 miles per hour with enemy missiles on her tail. She made it look easy. For 5 years, Rebecca Thompson was everything the Air Force wanted her to be. Fearless. Precise. Unstoppable. The recruiting poster come to life. The answer to every critic who said women couldn't handle combat aviation. She flew missions over Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. Classified operations in places the military wouldn't acknowledge. Close air support for ground troops in desperate situations. Reconnaissance flights through airspace so contested that survival was statistical improbability. Her service record included 3 distinguished flying crosses. 2 air medals with Valor device. A Purple Heart from shrapnel damage when her aircraft took ground fire over Mosul and she still completed the mission and landed safely. Generals knew her name. Senators were briefed on her operations. Other pilots studied her tactics in training simulations. Rebecca Thompson was a ghost in enemy airspace. She was a legend in her own. Then came the mission that changed everything. It was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance flight. Just Rebecca and her wingman, Lieutenant Michael Chen, sweeping through contested airspace over northern Syria. Intelligence suggested enemy forces were moving anti-aircraft systems into the area. Russian-made Sa-20 missiles, advanced enough to threaten coalition aircraft. Their job was to confirm the intelligence and report back. Simple. Clean. Low risk. Rebecca had flown dozens of missions like this. She'd brief with intelligence officers, study the terrain maps, check weather conditions, review threat assessments. Then she'd climb into her F-22, run through pre-flight checks with mechanical precision, and launch into situations that would terrify normal people but felt like home to her. Michael Chen was good. Not as experienced as Rebecca, but solid. Reliable. They'd flown together for 8 months. She trusted him. They launched at dawn. The sun was just breaking over the horizon as Rebecca's F-22 lifted off the runway at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey. Michael's aircraft followed 30 seconds later. They formed up at 15,000 feet and headed east. The flight should have taken 90 minutes. Sweep the reconnaissance corridor, confirm or deny the intelligence report, head home for debriefing and mediocre coffee in the ready room. They'd been 30 minutes into the flight when Michael's voice crackled over the encrypted radio. "Ghost, I've got a radar contact." Multiple hostiles, heading our way fast. Count 4 aircraft, bearing 085, 20 miles out. Rebecca checked her instruments. Nothing. Her stealth systems were working perfectly. The F-22's radar cross-section was smaller than a marble. She was invisible. But Michael wasn't flying an F-22. He was in an older F-16 Fighting Falcon. Excellent aircraft, proven in combat, reliable and lethal. But not stealthy. His radar signature lit up enemy systems like a spotlight. Rebecca's tactical mind processed the situation instantly. 4 enemy fighters against 2 Allied aircraft. Numbers disadvantage. But she had stealth superiority and better weapons systems. Michael had speed and maneuverability. They could handle this if they executed properly. Phoenix, break left, Rebecca commanded, using Michael's call sign. Defensive posture. I'll draw them off. Negative, Ghost. I can handle. That's an order, Phoenix. Break left now. Use terrain masking. I'll engage. She watched Michael's aircraft peel away sharply, dropping toward the mountainous terrain below where radar coverage was spotty. Good. He was following orders. He'd be safe while she handled the threat. Rebecca turned straight toward the incoming hostiles. 4 enemy fighters, older Russian models, probably MiG-29s, good aircraft in the right hands but no match for an F-22 in beyond visual range combat. They couldn't see her. Their radar swept right past her stealth signature. But she could see them perfectly. Her and APG-77 radar painted them clearly on her displays. 4 targets. 4 solutions. Rebecca's training took over, muscle memory built from thousands of hours in simulators and hundreds of hours in actual combat. Target acquisition. Weapons lock. Fire. The first IM-120 AMRAAM missile left her weapons bay at Mach 4. The enemy pilot never knew what hit him. His aircraft simply exploded in a fireball that lit up the dawn sky. The second enemy fighter tried to evade, braking hard right and deploying chaff to confuse incoming missiles. Didn't matter. Rebecca's missile tracking was too advanced. Another explosion. The third and fourth enemy fighters scattered, their pilots' voices probably screaming over their radios in confusion and terror, fighting an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't track, couldn't understand. Ghost was living up to her call sign. Rebecca pursued the third fighter. She had to. If they escaped, they'd report back. The mission would be compromised. Future operations would be at risk. More Allied pilots would die. She got the third fighter over the mountains, her missile finding it as it tried to hide in a valley. She was lining up the fourth, her targeting systems achieving lock, her finger moving toward the weapon's release, when Michael's voice screamed over the radio. Ghost. I'm hit. Repeat, I'm hit. Rebecca's blood froze. Her hand stopped. Every instinct, every tactical consideration, every mission parameter vanished. Michael was hit. She pulled hard left, abandoning her target, punishing her aircraft with a 9G turn that would have killed a less trained pilot. Racing back toward Michael's last position. Phoenix, report status. Static. Phoenix, respond. More static, then Michael's voice, weak and strained. Pain clear in every word. Ejection system damaged. Hydraulics failing. Ghost, I can't. I can't get out. Rebecca found him 2 minutes later. His F-16 was trailing black smoke, losing altitude fast. The right engine was completely dead. She could see flames licking along the fuselage. And below him, nothing but hostile territory for 100 miles. Mountains. Desert. Enemy forces who would capture or kill any downed pilot they found. Phoenix, stay with the aircraft. I'm calling for emergency support. No time, Michael said. His voice was calmer now. Resigned. He'd accepted what was about to happen. Ghost, listen to me. You need to complete the mission. Get the intel back to base. That's what matters. We're not leaving you. Rebecca. He used her real name. They'd gone through flight school together. He'd been at her promotion ceremony. He'd been the one who gave her the call sign Ghost because he said she flew like a spirit, appearing and disappearing without warning. You know the protocols. The mission comes first. The mission always comes first. Rebecca's hands tightened on her controls until her knuckles turned white. The mission. Always the mission. They drilled it into you from day one of training. Complete the objective. Don't deviate. Don't let personal considerations interfere with mission success. She'd followed that protocol for 5 years. 5 years of putting the mission first, of making hard choices, of accepting losses for the greater objective. Not today. I'm not leaving you, she repeated, her voice hard with determination. You don't have a choice. Michael's F-16 dropped another 1,000 feet. The smoke was thicker now. Rebecca could see flames spreading along the wing roots. The aircraft was dying. And Michael was trapped inside it. She made the decision in half a second. The kind of decision that ended careers or created legends. Phoenix, I'm going to guide you out. Follow my instructions exactly. Don't argue. Don't question. Just fly. For the next 12 minutes, Rebecca Thompson flew alongside Michael's dying aircraft, calling out heading corrections, talking him through emergency procedures that weren't in any manual, using her stealth position to scout the terrain ahead for possible landing sites. She radioed for emergency support, knowing the response time. 40 minutes minimum for a combat search and rescue helicopter to reach this position. 40 minutes Michael didn't have. She found a dried riverbed ahead. Maybe a mile long, relatively flat, clear of major obstacles. If Michael could keep the aircraft stable long enough to reach it, if he could control his descent, if the landing gear held, if a dozen other variables all went right, he might survive. Phoenix, 3 miles ahead. Coordinates marking now. You can make it. Ghost, even if I land, I'm in enemy territory. They'll capture me in hours. Then I'll make sure they don't. Michael made the approach at 200 miles per hour, far too fast for a safe landing, but he had no choice. His damaged hydraulics couldn't slow him down properly. The F-16 hit the riverbed hard, bounced 15 feet in the air, hit again, and cartwheeled twice before slamming to a stop in a massive cloud of dust and debris. Rebecca circled overhead, her heart in her throat, waiting for confirmation. Ghost. I'm alive. Aircraft is destroyed, but I'm alive. Rebecca exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes. Stay put. Help is coming. I'll keep you safe until they arrive. That's when she saw the trucks. 2 vehicles, armed soldiers visible in the beds, heading straight for the crash site. They must have seen the smoke, heard the crash, sent forces to investigate or capture. Rebecca didn't hesitate. She dropped her F-22 to 200 feet above the ground and accelerated to 700 miles per hour. The sonic boom alone was a weapon. The shockwave hit the trucks like a physical force, flipping one vehicle completely over, sending the other careening off the makeshift road. But more were coming. She could see them on her radar. 6 more vehicles converging on Michael's position. For 38 minutes, Rebecca Thompson flew combat air patrol over the dried riverbed like nothing the Air Force had ever seen. She used every trick she'd ever learned, every tactic she'd ever developed, every capability her aircraft possessed. She flew supersonic passes that scattered enemy forces with pure shock and noise. She used her cannon to strafe positions, not to kill but to terrify and suppress. She appeared from unexpected angles, disappeared before anti-aircraft fire could target her, reappeared somewhere else. She became a ghost in every sense of the word. present and absent, visible and invisible. A constant threat from an enemy that couldn't be tracked or predicted or countered. Enemy forces stopped advancing. They took cover. They called for their own air support, which Rebecca intercepted and drove away. She protected her wingmen with a combination of skill, determination, and absolute refusal to accept failure. The combat search and rescue helicopter arrived on minute 39. Michael was extracted on minute 42, lifted from the wreckage of his F-16 by a rescue crew that couldn't believe they'd found him alive and uninjured except for some bruises. Rebecca escorted the helicopter back to base, her fuel gauge reading critically low, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the flight stick, her body flooded with adrenaline that was starting to crash. When she landed at Incirlik, the base commander was waiting on the tarmac with half the squadron. Rebecca climbed out of her cockpit on legs that barely supported her. She removed her helmet with hands that trembled visibly. The base commander walked up to her. His face was unreadable. "Captain Thompson, that was the most reckless, insubordinate, mission-compromising flying I've ever witnessed in 25 years of service." Rebecca stood at attention. "Yes, sir. You abandoned your primary mission objectives. You endangered a $150 million stealth aircraft in unnecessary combat operations. You flew combat maneuvers in contested airspace without proper authorization or support. Yes, sir. You violated at least a dozen operational protocols. Yes, sir." The commander studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. "That was also the bravest, most skillful flying I've ever seen. You saved Lieutenant Chen's life through sheer refusal to accept reality. You held off enemy forces single-handedly for nearly 40 minutes. You executed tactical maneuvers that shouldn't be possible." He paused. "Captain Thompson, you just became a legend." They gave her another medal. They promoted her ahead of schedule. They made her an instructor at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, teaching other pilots advanced tactical aviation. And Captain Rebecca "Ghost" Thompson started having nightmares every single night. The nightmares started 3 days after the mission. Rebecca would fall asleep and immediately be back over Syria. Back in her cockpit. Back watching Michael's aircraft trailing fire and smoke. Except in the nightmares, she didn't save him. In the nightmares, she followed protocol. Completed the mission. Flew home. And Michael died screaming her name over the radio while she did nothing. She'd wake up at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, her heart racing, Michael's voice echoing in her head. "Ghost, I can't get out. Ghost, help me. Ghost, why did you leave me?" She tried to push through it. Told herself it was normal stress. Combat pilots dealt with this. It would fade with time. It didn't fade. It got worse. She'd be teaching a class at Nellis, explaining tactical maneuvers to young pilots who looked at her with admiration and awe, and suddenly she'd see Michael's burning F-16 in her mind. She'd lose her train of thought. Forget what she was saying. Have to excuse herself and stand in the bathroom until her hands stopped shaking. She'd be flying training exercises, and the simple act of being airborne would trigger flashbacks so intense she had to rely on autopilot while she fought to stay present. She stopped sleeping properly. 4 hours a night, maximum, broken into fragments between nightmares. She stopped eating regularly. Food tasted like ash. She stopped connecting with other pilots. Couldn't stand the way they looked at her like she was something special, something extraordinary, when she felt like she was falling apart from the inside. 6 months after saving Michael, she attended a memorial service for Captain James Rodriguez. He'd been shot down over Afghanistan on a mission similar to hers. Except nobody had been there to save him. Nobody had violated protocol and risked everything. Nobody had refused to accept his death. Rebecca stood at the service and looked at Rodriguez's wife, holding their 6-year-old daughter, and saw the woman's eyes fall on her. The expression on that widow's face asked a question nobody would voice: why did you save your wingman when nobody saved mine? That's when Rebecca understood she couldn't do this anymore. The psychological weight of being Ghost, of being the pilot who could do the impossible, who saved lives through sheer refusal to accept failure, had become indistinguishable from being the pilot who survived while others died. Every mission she flew successfully felt like proof that other pilots should have succeeded too. Every student she taught tactics to felt like evidence that Rodriguez and dozens of others should still be alive if they'd just been better, more skilled, more like Ghost. The survivor's guilt metastasized into something darker. Into the conviction that her survival was somehow purchased with others' deaths. That being legendary meant others had to be ordinary. That Ghost existed only because other pilots didn't. It wasn't rational. Rebecca knew it wasn't rational. But knowing something intellectually doesn't stop you from feeling it emotionally. 2 years after saving Michael, Rebecca requested a meeting with her commanding officer at Nellis. "I want to retire, sir." The commander looked genuinely shocked. "Captain, you're 31 years old. You're at the peak of your career. Your service record is exceptional. You're one of the best tactical aviators the Air Force has ever produced." "I know, sir. And I'm asking to retire." "Why? What's wrong? Are you injured? Is this medical?" Rebecca had practiced this answer for weeks. "Personal reasons, sir. I've served my time honorably. I'd like to pursue civilian opportunities." It was a lie. There were no civilian opportunities she wanted. There was no plan. No next step. No future she could imagine. She just wanted to stop being Ghost. Stop being legendary. Stop carrying the weight of expectations and admirations and psychological burden that felt like drowning in slow motion. The Air Force didn't want to lose her. They offered alternatives. Desk positions at the Pentagon. Training roles that didn't require flying. Consulting positions. Extended leave. Psychological counseling. Rebecca refused everything. She couldn't explain that the problem wasn't the flying itself. The problem was what flying represented. What Ghost represented. The entire identity had become toxic to her mental health, and the only solution she could see was complete separation. 6 months of bureaucratic processing later, Captain Rebecca Thompson separated from the United States Air Force with full honors, a service record that would have guaranteed her any aviation-related job in the civilian world, and psychological wounds that no exit interview could measure. She moved to Denver. Filed legal paperwork to change her name to Sarah Martinez. Enrolled in online courses for administrative work, the most generic, unremarkable career she could imagine. Found a job that required no special skills, no attention, no expectations beyond basic competence. And she disappeared into civilian life like a ghost in reverse. Present instead of absent. Visible but unnoticed. Ordinary in every possible way. For 7 years, it worked. 7 years of peace. 7 years of anonymity. 7 years of pretending Ghost never existed. Until Delta Flight 447. The turbulence hit without warning. Sarah's coffee cup jumped in its holder, splashing hot liquid across her laptop keyboard. Around her, passengers gasped as the aircraft dropped suddenly, that stomach-lurching sensation of falling that triggers primal fear. The seatbelt sign dinged urgently. Flight attendants stopped mid-service, securing the drink cart with practiced efficiency. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, professionally calm in that way pilots are trained to sound even when things are going wrong. "Folks, we're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, please return to your seats." Sarah's hands gripped her armrests. Just turbulence. Normal. Happens all the time on commercial flights. Nothing to worry about. Except her combat pilot instincts, buried but not dead, were screaming that something was wrong. The pattern of the turbulence felt wrong. Commercial aircraft encounter turbulence from weather systems, air pockets, jet streams. It comes in waves. This felt different. Sharper. More abrupt. The sound of the engines was wrong too. She could hear, or maybe feel, a subtle change in their rhythm. A hesitation. A fluctuation that shouldn't exist in properly functioning turbofans. The aircraft dropped again, harder this time. Passengers screamed. The overhead bins rattled. Someone's bag fell out and bounced down the aisle. The businessman beside Sarah had gone pale. This is normal, right? This happens. It's fine, Sarah said automatically, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Just air pockets. The pilots have it under control. But her mind was already running calculations she didn't want to run. Analyzing flight dynamics she tried to forget. Assessing the situation with expertise she'd spent 7 years suppressing. The angle of descent was too steep for simple turbulence recovery. The engine sound suggested power fluctuation, possibly fuel flow issues or electronic control problems. The pattern of movement felt like the pilots were fighting the aircraft rather than flying it smoothly. This wasn't routine turbulence. This was an emergency in progress. The pilot's voice returned, and this time the professional calm had cracks in it. Stress bleeding through the training. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties with our navigation and control systems. We're coordinating with air traffic control. Please remain calm and seated. Technical difficulties. Navigation and control systems. Multiple systems failing simultaneously. Sarah's pilot brain analyzed the implications automatically. Modern aircraft had redundant systems. Backup systems for the backup systems. For multiple critical systems to fail at once meant either catastrophic mechanical failure, unlikely on a well-maintained commercial aircraft, or external interference. Someone was attacking this aircraft. The aircraft shuddered violently. The lights flickered. And oxygen masks dropped from the overhead compartments, dangling on their tubes like yellow accusations. Passengers screamed louder now. A child started crying. A woman 3 rows up began praying loudly in Spanish. "Oh God," the businessman whispered. "Oh God, we're going to die." Sarah stared at her oxygen mask, watching it swing with the aircraft's movements. 7 years. 7 years of hiding. 7 years of being nobody. 7 years of pretending she couldn't help even if things went wrong. The pilot's voice came back, barely controlled panic now. "This is an emergency. We are declaring an emergency. Multiple system failures. Please follow all flight attendant instructions. Brace positions when instructed. Multiple system failures." Commercial aircraft didn't experience multiple system failures unless something catastrophic was happening. And Sarah knew, from thousands of hours of flight experience, from combat operations where enemies tried to bring her down, that this had all the signatures of electronic warfare. Someone was jamming this aircraft's systems, trying to force it down. But why? Why target a random commercial flight? Unless someone aboard was important enough to kill. Or unless this was terrorism on a scale that would make headlines worldwide. Sarah looked around the cabin. Passengers panicking. Flight attendants trying to maintain order while their own faces showed terror. Nobody with the expertise to understand what was happening. Nobody with the training to help. Nobody except her. And if she helped, if she revealed her expertise, her 7 years of anonymity would end. Sarah Martinez would disappear. Ghost would be exposed. Everything she'd built, all the peace she'd found, the safety of being invisible, gone. She sat frozen, paralyzed by competing imperatives. The duty that had defined her entire military career screamed at her to help. The self-preservation instinct that had saved her mental health screamed at her to stay hidden. 156 lives hung in the balance. Against her own psychological survival. The aircraft dropped again, sharper this time. Someone vomited. Multiple people were crying now. The flight attendants had stopped trying to calm people and were strapped into their own seats, holding on, waiting for whatever came next. Sarah's hands shook where they gripped the armrests. This wasn't fair. She'd done her time. She'd served. She'd sacrificed. She'd earned the right to walk away, to be normal, to protect herself. But 156 people were about to die. And she was the only person on this aircraft who might be able to save them. That's when she heard it. A voice over the cabin speakers, different from the pilot's voice. Military precision cutting through the chaos like a knife. Delta 447, this is Raptor lead of the 1st Fighter Squadron, United States Air Force. We've been scrambled to provide escort for your emergency. Transmit your situation report. F-22s. They'd sent F-22 Raptors. Sarah's chest tightened like a fist had closed around her heart. Her old aircraft. Her old life. Her old identity, coming back like a ghost she couldn't escape. The commercial pilot's voice responded, shaking with barely controlled terror. Raptor lead, we have complete navigation failure, hydraulics are degrading, flight controls are not responding properly. We're losing altitude and our emergency systems aren't functioning. We need immediate assistance. Copy that, Delta 447. We're establishing escort positions now. We'll coordinate with ground control for emergency landing. Stand by for. The radio cut off. Silence for 3 heartbeats. 4. 5. When the F-22 pilot spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Shock replaced precision. Disbelief replaced confidence. Delta 447, I need to confirm something. Do you have a passenger aboard, female, approximately 5'6", brown hair, sitting in seat 14C? Sarah stopped breathing. The entire world narrowed to those words. The commercial pilot sounded confused. Raptor lead, affirmative, but I don't understand why that's relevant to our emergency situation. Another pause. Longer this time. Sarah could imagine the F-22 pilot staring at cabin camera feeds, trying to believe what he was seeing, confirming against photographs or descriptions from classified files. When he spoke again, his voice carried emotions that military radio discipline normally suppressed. Disbelief. Hope. Desperation. Ma'am, is that you, Night Fury? The cabin fell into complete silence around her. Every passenger within earshot turned to stare at Sarah. The businessman beside her looked at her with wide, confused eyes. Night Fury. What does that mean? Do they mean you? But Sarah couldn't answer. Couldn't move. Couldn't think. 7 years. 7 years of running. 7 years of hiding. 7 years of being invisible. Gone. Destroyed. Ended. By 3 words from a voice she didn't even recognize. Ma'am, is that you? The F-22 pilot's voice came again, more urgent now. Professional discipline cracking under the weight of recognition and desperate hope. Ma'am, this is Captain Jake Morrison, call sign Hawk. I was in your advanced tactical training class at Nellis Air Force Base in 2015. Ma'am, I recognize you from the cabin camera feeds we're receiving. These people need your help. We need Ghost. Sarah, no, Rebecca, sat frozen in her seat. Her carefully constructed world collapsing around her like a building in an earthquake. 7 years of Sarah Martinez, of insurance claims and unremarkable sandwiches and being nobody, crumbling into dust. The commercial pilot's voice carried new energy. New hope. Raptor lead, are you telling me I have a military pilot on board my aircraft? Captain, if that's who I think it is, you have more than just a military pilot. Captain Morrison's voice carried reverence that made Rebecca's chest tight. You have Captain Rebecca Thompson. Call sign Ghost. One of the most accomplished tactical aviators the Air Force has ever produced. Sir, if she's willing to help, she can coordinate crisis management that might save everyone on that aircraft. The businessman grabbed Rebecca's arm. His grip was tight, desperate. You're a pilot. A military pilot. You can help them. You can save us. Rebecca looked at him. Saw the terror in his eyes. Saw the desperate hope. Looked past him at the other passengers. A mother holding a sleeping infant. Two teenage girls clutching each other and crying. An elderly couple holding hands. A young man in a business suit, probably flying to his first real job interview. A woman who looked like a teacher, correcting papers even now, even in crisis, because what else could she do? 156 people. 156 lives. Against her 7 years of peace. Ma'am. The flight attendant appeared beside her row, phone in hand, face showing professional composure barely holding back panic. The captain is requesting your presence in the cockpit immediately. He says if you're who the Air Force says you are, we need your help now. Rebecca sat motionless. This was the moment. The choice point. The decision that would define everything that came after. If she stood up, if she went to that cockpit, if she helped, Sarah Martinez would cease to exist. Ghost would be revealed. The media would discover her. The Air Force would want her back. The peaceful, invisible life she'd built would be destroyed permanently. But if she stayed silent, if she kept hiding, if she protected her anonymity, 156 people would probably die. The commercial pilots were good, she didn't doubt that, but they weren't trained for this. They weren't prepared for electronic warfare and system failures and crisis management at this level. They would try their best. Their best might not be enough. Rebecca thought about Captain Rodriguez. The memorial service. His widow's eyes asking that unspoken question, why did you survive when others died? She'd never had a good answer. Maybe this was the answer. Maybe she survived so she could be here, now, when 156 people needed someone with her specific expertise. Maybe running from Ghost for 7 years had just been preparation for this moment. Or maybe that was all rationalization, and the simple truth was that she couldn't sit here and let people die when she had the skills to save them, regardless of what it cost her personally. Rebecca unbuckled her seatbelt. Her hands didn't shake. She stood up, and as she did, something fundamental shifted in her posture. The rounded shoulders straightened. The forgettable face became focused and sharp. The invisible administrative assistant dissolved like morning fog, and something harder, more dangerous, more capable emerged from underneath. 7 years of hiding, ending in one motion. I'll help, she said. Her voice was different. Stronger. The voice of someone who'd commanded squadrons and flown combat missions and made life-or-death decisions at supersonic speeds. The flight attendant's face flooded with relief. Thank you. God, thank you. This way. Rebecca walked toward the cockpit like she was walking toward a fighter jet on a combat mission. The other passengers stared at her as she passed. The invisible woman they'd ignored for hours, suddenly radiating command presence that made it physically difficult to look away. Someone started clapping. Then others joined. Within seconds, most of the conscious passengers were applauding, this desperate, terrified gratitude for someone, anyone, who might save them. Rebecca ignored it. Focused on the cockpit door ahead. Focused on the crisis. Focused on being Ghost one more time, even though she'd promised herself she never would be again. The cockpit door opened. The two pilots turned to look at her with desperate hope. Rebecca stepped inside and spoke words she hadn't said in 7 years. I'm Captain Rebecca Thompson, United States Air Force, retired. Call sign Ghost. Tell me your situation. The cockpit was controlled chaos. Warning lights flashing red and amber across every panel. Alarm tones creating a symphony of disaster. The captain wrestling with a control yoke that barely responded. The first officer coordinating frantically with air traffic control while monitoring systems that were failing faster than he could track. Rebecca moved into the space between the pilot's seats without waiting for invitation. Her eyes scanned the instruments with automatic precision, processing information at a speed that surprised even her. 7 years away from cockpits, and the training was still there, muscle memory and neural pathways that no amount of administrative work could erase. Navigation systems, completely offline. Hydraulics, degraded to 40% effectiveness and dropping. Flight controls, responding sluggishly, with unpredictable lag. Electrical systems, fluctuating. Fuel flow, irregular patterns suggesting electronic interference rather than mechanical failure. External attack, Rebecca said immediately. Someone's jamming your systems with military-grade electronic warfare equipment. The captain looked at her with exhausted, desperate eyes. Can you help us? I can try. First, I need to coordinate with the F-22 formation. She picked up the radio headset without asking permission. Captain Morrison, this is Ghost. I'm in the cockpit. I need your tactical assessment immediately. The response was instant. Captain Morrison's voice carried relief so profound it was almost painful to hear. Ghost, ma'am, it's really you. I can't believe. Ma'am, we're detecting electromagnetic jamming consistent with Russian pattern military equipment. Ground-based source, approximately 40 miles northeast of your current position. Someone deployed serious assets to bring this aircraft down. Rebecca's mind processed implications while her hands moved automatically, adjusting displays to show the information she needed. Can your formation suppress the jamming source? Negative, ma'am. It's in a populated area. We can't engage without civilian casualties. Ground forces are moving to neutralize it, but they need time. How much time? 15 minutes minimum. Rebecca looked at the fuel gauges, the altimeter showing steady altitude loss, the hydraulic pressure continuing to degrade. We don't have 15 minutes. We have maybe 8 before this aircraft becomes uncontrollable. The commercial captain's face went even paler. 8 minutes. That's not enough time to reach any major airport. Then we don't land at a major airport. Rebecca's voice was calm. Command calm. The tone that made junior officers stop panicking and start executing. Captain Morrison, I need alternate landing options within 5 minutes of our current position. Silence on the radio. Rebecca could imagine Morrison consulting with his formation, checking maps, running calculations. Ghost, there's a regional airport 45 miles southwest. Single runway, 7,800 feet. No major emergency services. Ma'am, it's not rated for aircraft this size. The commercial captain looked at Rebecca with something between hope and horror. A 737 needs at least 6,000 feet under perfect conditions. With degraded systems, we'd need more. And that's assuming we can even reach it. We can reach it, Rebecca said with certainty she didn't entirely feel. And I can land this aircraft on 7,800 feet with degraded systems. How? Because I've landed damaged F-22s on runways half that length with no hydraulics and hostile fire incoming. She turned to face him directly. Captain, I need you to trust me completely. Follow my instructions exactly. Don't question. Don't hesitate. Just fly. The captain studied her face. Whatever he saw there, confidence, competence, the absolute certainty of someone who'd done impossible things before, made him nod. Okay. The aircraft is yours. Tell me what you need. Rebecca turned back to the instruments. To Captain Morrison on the radio. To the crisis that was spiraling toward catastrophe. She'd spent 7 years running from this feeling. From the weight of lives depending on her decisions. From the pressure of being the person everyone expected to save them. From being Ghost. But Ghost was who these people needed. So Ghost was who she'd be. Captain Morrison, coordinate with air traffic control for emergency clearance to regional airport. I need approach vectors, wind conditions, runway details. And Captain, she paused, I need you to remember everything I taught you about crisis management and emergency landings. We're going to execute this exactly like the training scenarios at Nellis. Copy that, ma'am. Morrison's voice carried focused confidence now. Professional competence replacing emotional reaction. Coordinating with ATC now. Raptor formation will maintain close escort and provide tactical support throughout your approach. Ghost, we have your back. Rebecca spent the next 7 minutes in a state of hyperfocus that felt simultaneously foreign and natural. Foreign because she hadn't accessed this level of concentration in 7 years. Natural because it was hardwired into her brain from thousands of hours of training and hundreds of hours of actual combat operations. She walked the commercial pilots through emergency procedures that weren't in any FAA manual. Techniques she developed during combat operations where survival meant innovation. She had them reconfigure the aircraft for maximum drag to burn off excess speed without losing control authority. She coordinated with Morrison's F-22 formation to provide visual confirmation of systems since their instruments might be corrupted by jamming. She calculated approach angles that violated commercial standards but were necessary given their abbreviated runway and degraded systems. The regional airport appeared through the windscreen. A single ribbon of concrete stretching across scrubland that looked impossibly short for an aircraft this size. Ghost, you're at 5,000 feet, 8 miles from runway threshold, Morrison transmitted. Approach corridor is clear. Emergency vehicles are positioned. Ma'am, wind is gusting to 15 knots from the east. That's going to make your approach challenging. I've landed in worse, Rebecca said. It was true. She'd landed in conditions that would have grounded commercial aviation for days. She talked the captain through final approach configuration. Had him set flaps at angles commercial pilots rarely used. Coordinated power settings that felt wrong but were right for this specific situation. 300 feet, Morrison called. 200. Approach looks good, Ghost. You're centered on runway. 100 feet. Rebecca could feel the captain's tension. See his hands white-knuckled on the yoke. Sense his terror that this unconventional approach would end in disaster. Trust the procedure, she said quietly. 50 feet. Main gear contact on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. Touchdown now. Hold the nose up. Maximum aerodynamic braking. The aircraft slammed onto the runway harder than any commercial landing should be. Passengers screamed. The airframe groaned. But the main landing gear held. Nose gear down. Full brakes. Don't try to be gentle. We need maximum deceleration immediately. The captain followed her instructions exactly. The brakes screamed. Tires smoked. And the aircraft decelerated hard enough that loose items flew forward in the cabin. Through the windscreen, the end of the runway approached. 2,000 feet remaining. 1,000 feet. 500. We're going to make it, the first officer whispered. The aircraft shuddered to a complete stop with maybe 300 feet of runway remaining. Complete silence in the cockpit. Then the captain exhaled shakily. You saved us. You actually saved us. Rebecca removed the headset. Her hands were steady. You did excellent work, Captain. Your flying kept this aircraft controllable. I just provided tactical guidance. That was more than guidance. That was. He trailed off, searching for words. That was Ghost, Captain Morrison's voice came through the speakers. Ma'am, that was the most impressive crisis management I've ever witnessed. You just saved 156 lives. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft. Ground crews positioning stairs. Fire teams standing ready in case of post-landing fires. And Rebecca knew that her 7 years of invisibility were over. When Rebecca stepped out of the cockpit, 156 passengers stood and applauded. Not polite applause. Desperate, grateful, tears streaming down faces applause. The sound of people who thought they were about to die and just realized they'd live. The businessman from 14B pushed through the crowd. His face was streaked with tears. You saved us. You were sitting right next to me, and I had no idea. I thought you were just, and you're actually. He couldn't finish. Just grabbed her in a hug that she didn't return. Other passengers wanted to touch her, thank her, express gratitude that had no adequate words. Rebecca moved through them toward the exit, not rudely but purposefully. She needed out of this confined space. Needed air. Needed distance from the emotional intensity that felt like drowning. Captain Morrison was waiting at the bottom of the aircraft stairs, still in his flight suit. 3 other F-22 pilots stood with him. All 4 snapped to attention and saluted as she descended. Rebecca returned the salute automatically. The gesture felt both natural and devastating. She hadn't saluted anyone in 7 years. "Ma'am," Morrison said, his voice tight with emotion. "When you disappeared 7 years ago, it devastated the entire tactical aviation community. You were the instructor who shaped how half the Air Force flies. You pioneered procedures that have saved countless lives. You were Ghost, ma'am. The legend. And then suddenly you were gone, and nobody knew where or why." Rebecca met his eyes. Saw genuine pain there. Saw confusion. "Captain Morrison, I left because I needed to. Because being Ghost was destroying me. Because sometimes the cost of excellence is higher than anyone should have to pay. But ma'am, you just proved you're still Ghost. Your capabilities haven't diminished. The Air Force needs you. We need you. The Air Force has plenty of excellent pilots. Not like you." Rebecca looked at him. At the 3 other pilots. At the crowd of grateful passengers. At the media vehicles already gathering at the airport perimeter. "Captain, 7 years ago I walked away because the psychological burden of being the pilot who could do the impossible became indistinguishable from being the pilot who survived while others died. I left because survivors' guilt and combat trauma and the weight of being legendary combined into something that made me unable to function." Morrison's face showed dawning understanding. Horror, even. "Ma'am, I didn't realize. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I recognized you. I'm sorry I destroyed your anonymity. You saved 156 lives by recognizing me. That matters more than my anonymity." Rebecca paused. "But Captain, understand this, I helped today because people needed me. That doesn't mean I'm returning to service. Ghost isn't coming back. Then what happens now?" "Good question." Her cover was blown. Military personnel had confirmed Ghost's location. Media would discover that a legendary pilot saved a commercial flight. Sarah Martinez couldn't exist anymore. But maybe Ghost didn't have to exist either. Maybe she could be something in between. Someone who acknowledged her past without being consumed by it. "I don't know yet," Rebecca said honestly. "But I'm going to figure it out." 3 months later. Rebecca sat in a coffee shop in Denver. Not the one Sarah Martinez had frequented. A different one. Her laptop was open, but she wasn't looking at insurance spreadsheets. She was reviewing a consulting contract from the FAA. They wanted her expertise on emergency procedures. Teaching commercial pilots advanced crisis management. Using Ghost's experience to save lives without requiring her to fly combat missions. It was a compromise. A way to use her skills without destroying herself. Her phone buzzed. A text from Michael Chen, Lieutenant Phoenix, the wingman she'd saved all those years ago. "Saw you on the news. Knew you couldn't stay hidden forever. You okay?" Rebecca typed back, "Getting there." Still figuring things out. That's all any of us can do. Proud of you, Ghost. She smiled slightly at the screen. Another text came through, this one from Captain Morrison, teaching assignment at Nellis next month. Guest lecture on crisis management. Would be honored if you'd come speak to the new pilots. No pressure. Just thought I'd ask. Rebecca stared at the message for a long moment. A guest lecture. Not permanent duty. Not a return to service. Just sharing expertise. Maybe she could do that. Maybe teaching the next generation of pilots was a way to honor Ghost without being destroyed by her. She looked out the window at the Denver skyline. Somewhere, pilots were flying training missions using procedures she'd developed. Somewhere, commercial aircraft were landing safely because of protocols influenced by her innovations. Somewhere, Michael Chen was alive because she'd refused to leave him behind. Her legacy existed whether she wanted it to or not. The question wasn't whether to acknowledge Ghost. The question was how to integrate Ghost with Rebecca in a way that didn't destroy her mental health. She typed a response to Morrison, "I'll think about it. Ask me again next week." A woman at the next table glanced over. "Excuse me, aren't you the pilot who saved that flight a few months ago? The one they're calling the Ghost?" Rebecca met her eyes. Didn't deny it. Didn't run from it. "I helped coordinate an emergency landing, yes. That was incredible. My sister was on that flight. You saved her life. I'm glad she's okay." The woman smiled and returned to her coffee. Rebecca turned back to her laptop. Sarah Martinez was gone. That identity couldn't exist anymore. But Ghost didn't have to define her entirely either. Maybe she could just be Rebecca. Someone with an extraordinary past and ordinary present. Someone who used her skills when needed but didn't build her entire identity around them. Someone who acknowledged her capabilities without letting them consume her. Someone who carried trauma but wasn't destroyed by it. Someone human. She opened her email and started drafting a response to the FAA consultant offer. She wasn't invisible anymore. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the real courage wasn't hiding from who she'd been. Maybe it was accepting all of herself, the legendary pilot and the wounded veteran, the hero and the human, and finding a way to live authentically as both. 7 years of running were over. Now came the harder part, standing still and facing herself. But she'd survived worse. She was Ghost, after all. And ghosts were harder to destroy than most people realized.